We only tolerate you for his sake, my mill hissed. My reply shocked everyone. Now let me take you to the exact moment it happened. We were sitting around the dining table, the air thick with the smell of roasted turkey and garlic mashed potatoes. The clink of silverware against plates made a rhythm in the background, like a clock ticking towards something inevitable. My mother-in-law leaned forward, her voice dropping low, sharp like a knife sliding across glass. We only tolerate you for his sake, she hissed. I froze. My face didn't flinch, but inside it was like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water down my spine. For a second, the room blurred. The laughter from the other end of the table sounded far away, muffled, as if I had been dunked underwater. I looked at her, her eyes narrowed, a little smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. She wanted me small, embarrassed, crushed, right there in front of the family. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. I smiled. Just a small, calm smile, the kind that makes people lean closer because they can't tell what's coming. I set my glass down slowly, deliberately, and in that pause, you could feel the tension crawl across the table. Forks hovered midair. My husband's hand twitched near his napkin, like he knew a storm was about to break. And then I opened my mouth. One line. That's all it took. The whole table gasped, and silence fell so heavy, it was almost a sound by itself. The funny thing is, I should have seen it coming. I had a gut feeling before I even walked into that house. You know when something in your stomach tells you tonight isn't going to be the smooth, happy family dinner everyone pretends it will be? That was me, standing in the driveway, holding a pie I baked from scratch, wondering if I should just turn around and go home. But guilt has a way of pushing you forward. Family obligation, right? So I went inside. The moment I stepped through the door, there were already signs. My sister-in-law got the first hug, the biggest smile. My father-in-law barely glanced up from his football game before grunting hello. And my mother-in-law? She gave me that look. You know the one. The kind that says, "Why are you here?" Even though you were invited. I brushed it off, told myself, don't overthink. Just enjoy the meal. But old patterns don't lie. This wasn't the first time she tried to cut me down. At our wedding, she leaned over and whispered, "Don't get too comfortable." My son always comes to his senses. At my daughter's birthday party, she brought a huge wrapped gift, then handed it to my niece in front of everyone, pretending it was just a mix-up. And each time I swallowed my pride, smiled, let it pass, because I believed keeping peace was more important than speaking up. But sitting at that dinner table, hearing her hiss, "We only tolerate you for his sake," something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage, not even sadness. It was clarity. I realized she had been playing the same game for years, and I had been letting her win by staying silent. My heart pounded in my chest, my palms itched, but my voice, when it came, was steady. I smiled, set my glass down, leaned forward just slightly, and delivered my line. I won't repeat it yet, you'll hear the exact words in part 2. But let me tell you this. Her face went pale. Her fork clattered against the plate. And for the first time in years, the balance of power shifted in that room. I didn't yell, I didn't curse, I didn't even raise my voice. I just told the truth in a way she couldn't twist or spin. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was electric. Like every single person at that table realized they had just witnessed a moment that couldn't be undone. And as I sat there, calm on the outside, storming on the inside, I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe tonight is the night she finally sees me, not as someone she can push around, but as someone who isn't afraid to push back. That night, I walked out of that house knowing something had changed. Not just between her and me, but for the whole family. They couldn't unhear what I had said. They couldn't unsee her being stripped of the control she always thought she had. And that's just the beginning. What happened after will shock you even more. Let's pick up right where we left off. After I set my glass down and delivered that single line that froze the entire table, the air felt heavier than before. My mother-in-law's smirk collapsed. And for once, she didn't have a comeback ready. But to really understand why that moment mattered, you need to see what led up to it. Because dinners like this one never happen in a vacuum. The evening had started off with all the familiar chaos. My sister-in-law was fussing over her new dress, spinning around in the foyer so everyone could admire it. My father-in-law had the television blaring in the living room, tuned to a football game, even though everyone else was gathered around the table. The kids ran back and forth, sticky fingers leaving little prints on the sliding glass doors. The house smelled of roasted turkey and buttery rolls, that kind of heavy, comforting scent that should wrap around you like a blanket, but instead of comfort, it felt like a mask. The cheerfulness was paper thin, stretched over cracks everyone pretended not to see. I had walked in carrying that pie I mentioned, the one I baked from scratch, trying to contribute something homemade. My mother-in-law glanced at it, muttered, "Oh, just put it on the counter," and immediately turned to fuss over my sister-in-law's store-bought cheesecake. That was my first clue. Small, almost invisible, but enough to sting. When we finally sat down, the seating arrangement told its own story. She placed my husband directly at her right hand, her daughter on the left. I ended up wedged between the kids, barely in the circle of conversation. Plates clattered, wine glasses filled, and she started a round of toasts. One for her daughter's promotion, one for her husband's patience, even one for the neighbors who were such great friends. And me? Not a word, not a glance. It was as if I was just a chair that happened to be occupied. Still, I smiled. I kept my voice light when I joined in the small talk. My husband tried to bridge the gap a few times, asking me to share about work or a story from my week, but she always redirected. "That's nice," she'd cut in, then swing the spotlight back to someone else. The message was clear. My presence was tolerated, not welcomed. And then came that sentence, the one she hissed like it had been rehearsed. "We only tolerate you for his sake." Her voice didn't carry across the room. It was low, sharp, meant for me alone, but sharp enough that the others caught it too. Heads turned. Forks paused mid-air. I felt the blood rush in my ears, but I refused to flinch. That's when I smiled, set down my glass, and dropped my line. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was loaded. My sister-in-law's eyes darted between us like she was watching a tennis match. My father-in-law cleared his throat, but no sound came out. Even the kids stopped whispering and leaned in. And my husband, he froze. He looked at me like he was seeing a version of me he hadn't seen in years, one that wouldn't just take it quietly. In that moment, I realized how many times this had played out before in smaller ways. Every dig, every backhanded compliment, every time she shifted the spotlight away. She had been writing a script where I was always the supporting character, the one fading into the background. But I wasn't playing that role anymore. The rest of the dinner stumbled along awkwardly after that. She avoided my eyes, stabbing at her food with more force than necessary. The others tried to patch over the tension with light conversation, but it never landed. My sister-in-law made a joke about holiday shopping. No one laughed. My father-in-law refilled his wine twice, muttering about the game. Even the kids grew restless and quiet. The atmosphere had shifted, and everyone could feel it. What struck me most was my husband's silence. He didn't defend me, but he didn't defend her either. He just sat there, caught in the middle, his face pale. Later, I would realize that moment forced him to see the dynamic he'd been pretending wasn't there. He couldn't unhear her words or ignore my reply. By the time dessert was brought out, the night was already over in spirit. The cheesecake sat untouched, my pie still on the counter where I had left it. People made excuses to leave early. Coats were grabbed, hugs were rushed. It was the shortest family dinner I had ever attended. When I finally stood to go, I caught my mother-in-law's eyes. For once, there was no smirk, no condescension. Just silence. Maybe she was shocked, maybe she was furious, but either way, she knew something had shifted. I walked out into the cold night air, the smell of wood smoke lingering from a neighbor's fireplace. My husband followed a few steps behind, silent, deep in thought. And as we got into the car, I knew this dinner wasn't just another family evening gone wrong. It was the start of something different, something that couldn't be undone. Because the truth had been spoken out loud, and once that happens, there's no going back. Would you like me to take part 3 into the fallout, what happened the next day, when she tried to regain control? The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, my mind still replaying the words from the night before. Her hiss, my reply, the silence that followed it all, looped in my head like a song stuck on repeat. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared out the window as the steam curled up from my mug. I knew it wasn't over. Women like her don't let things end with silence. Sure enough, just before 9, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother-in-law. Short, clipped, no greeting. "We need to talk." My stomach tightened. I didn't respond right away. I let the phone sit there on the table while I sipped my coffee. I wasn't going to rush to her call anymore. That was part of the old script. By 10, there was a knock at my door. Not just a polite knock, but the kind that insists, the kind that says, "I'm not leaving until you answer." I peeked through the peephole. It was her. She stood there with her coat wrapped tight, her lips pressed together in a thin line. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she shifted her weight like she was bracing herself. I opened the door slowly, leaning against the frame. "You could have called," I said, my voice calm. She brushed past me without asking, stepping into my living room as if it still belonged to her. That was her way, always claiming space, always assuming the right to enter. For a moment, we just stood there. She glanced around, as if searching for something to criticize. The kids' shoes by the door, a stack of unopened mail, the blanket draped across the couch. Her eyes landed on each detail, cataloging them like ammunition. Then she turned back to me. "You embarrassed me last night." The words hung heavy in the air. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch until it felt uncomfortable, forcing her to fill it. "In front of everyone," she added, her voice tightening. "You undermined me in my own home. That was the heart of it, wasn't it? Not just what I said, but where I said it." The dining table had always been her stage, her arena. And last night, I had stepped into the spotlight and refused to back down. I crossed my arms and looked at her steadily. "You did that yourself," I said. "You called me out in front of everyone," I just answered. My voice didn't waver, though my pulse beat hard in my throat. She blinked, taken aback. Maybe she expected me to apologize, to retreat like I usually did. Instead, I stood there, holding her gaze. For once, she had to look away first. She tried again, softer this time, almost coaxing. "You know I only said that because I want what's best for my son. You don't understand what it's like to see him change. To see him pulled away from his family." There it was, the manipulation, wrapped in concern. But I wasn't buying it anymore. "You mean pulled away from your control?" I said. "He hasn't changed. He's grown. And maybe it's time you did too." Her face hardened. "You're twisting my words." "No," I said quietly. "I'm just not letting you twist mine anymore." The silence stretched again, thicker this time. She shifted on her feet, clearly unused to this version of me, the one who didn't shrink back. She muttered something under her breath, something about respect, about how families should stick together, but her voice lacked the sharp edge it usually carried. Finally, she reached for her purse and adjusted the strap on her shoulder. "This isn't over," she said, almost like a threat, almost like a promise. I opened the door wide. "You're right," I replied. "It's not, but it won't be like it was before." She paused, her eyes searching my face for a sign of weakness, a crack she could slip back through. But I didn't give her one. I held her gaze until she finally turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her, and I exhaled slowly, realizing I had been holding my breath. I stood there for a moment, the quiet of the house pressing in around me. It was over for now, but I knew she would be back, maybe with a different tactic, maybe with reinforcements in the form of family pressure. That was her way. She never fought, just once. She circled, waited, came back again. But something had shifted. The balance of power wasn't the same. She had seen that I wasn't going to bend the way I used to. And deep down, I think she knew it too. When my husband came home that evening, he looked at me carefully, like he was trying to measure the ground we were standing on. "She came by, didn't she?" he asked. I nodded. She did. "And?" I met his eyes, and I didn't back down. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's about time," he muttered. And in that moment, I knew the real fallout hadn't even started yet. The dinner was just the spark. What came next was going to be the fire. Do you want me to take part 4 into how that fire spread through the rest of the family when word got around? 2 days later, the fire I had been bracing for finally caught. Word spreads fast in families, faster when there's drama at the dinner table. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Missed calls from my sister-in-law, a text from my father-in-law that just said, "Call me back," and a string of messages from cousins I barely talked to. My mother-in-law had clearly been busy painting her version of the story. At first, I ignored it. I went about my day, did the grocery run, folded laundry, tried to hold on to normal. But by evening, the weight of it was too much. I opened one of the messages. It was from my sister-in-law. "I can't believe you embarrassed Mom like that. She's devastated. We all heard what you said. You could have just let it go." I sat there staring at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. My first instinct was to defend myself, to write paragraphs explaining exactly how it happened. But then I stopped, because that's the game, isn't it? She creates chaos, and I'm left scrambling to justify my side, to prove I'm not the villain. Not this time. I put the phone down. Later that night, while I was finishing up dinner, my husband came into the kitchen. He looked uneasy, his shoulders tight. "She called me," he said. He didn't need to say who. "She wants us to come over this weekend. She says it's important." I raised an eyebrow. Important like an apology session? Or important like a trap? He half smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I don't know." But she sounded shaken. Not angry, more like desperate. That word stuck with me. Desperate. I had never thought of her that way before. She was always the one in control, the one pulling the strings. But desperate? That was new. The weekend came quickly. We drove over, the silence in the car thick. I watched the trees blur past the window, my hands clenched in my lap. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw more cars than usual. My stomach sank. This wasn't just a talk. This was an ambush. Inside, the whole family was gathered. Her brothers, her daughter, even a couple of cousins I hadn't seen in years. They were spread out in the living room like a jury, waiting for the trial to begin. My mother-in-law sat in her usual chair, posture perfect, hands folded in her lap. She looked calm, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers tapped against each other. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. That alone put me on edge. She gestured for us to sit. We did, my husband close beside me. She wasted no time. "I think we all know why we're here," she began. There was an incident at dinner. Words were exchanged. Feelings were hurt. Her eyes flicked to me, sharp and pointed. But family is about forgiveness, about respect. There it was again, respect. Her favorite word, always defined on her terms. I could feel the eyes of the room on me, waiting for me to fold, to apologize. I took a slow breath. "You're right," I said evenly. "Family is about respect." That's exactly why I spoke up, because respect goes both ways, and I haven't been shown any for years. A ripple went through the room. My sister-in-law shifted uncomfortably. My father-in-law cleared his throat, staring down at the carpet. For the first time, the script wasn't playing out the way she wanted. Her smile faltered. "You think you've been disrespected?" she asked, her tone incredulous. "We've welcomed you into this family." "Welcomed me?" I echoed. "You told me at my own wedding not to get too comfortable. You ignored my daughter at her birthday. You looked me in the eye last week and said you only tolerate me. That's not welcome. That's barely even kindness." Silence again, heavy and thick. Her brothers looked away. Her daughter bit her lip. Even she couldn't hide the crack in her mask now. My husband finally spoke, his voice steady but firm. "She's right. I've let it slide for too long. But last night, hearing you say it out loud, it's not okay. Not anymore." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw fear flash across her face. Not fear of me, but fear of losing her grip. She had always counted on him to stay silent, to back her by omission, and now he wasn't. She tried to recover, her voice rising. "So what? You're turning against me now? After everything I've done for this family?" He shook his head. "No one's turning against you, but we're done pretending. You can't keep cutting her down and expect us to stay quiet." The room felt like it shifted. The jury wasn't siding with her anymore. They weren't rushing to her defense, just sitting in uneasy silence. For once, she was alone in her performance. I didn't need to say more. I had already said enough. I sat there, calm, steady, letting the weight of my words and his carry through the room. And in that stillness, something broke not in me, but in her. Because for the first time, she realized her grip wasn't unshakable. And as we left that house later, the cold air hitting my face like a cleansing wave, I knew the story wasn't finished. The fire had started, and it was spreading. Do you want me to carry part 5 into how that fire spread beyond her house? How friends, neighbors, and the wider family all got drawn into it? The fire didn't stay contained to her house. Within a week, it spread further than I imagined. Families talk, neighbors listen, and before long, it wasn't just about what happened at one dinner table. It became the story people whispered about at church, at the grocery store, even at the kids' school. And the version being told depended on who you heard it from. From her side, I was the villain. I had disrespected the matriarch, as she apparently phrased it, and I had humiliated her in front of her own family. She leaned heavy on that word humiliated, as if me simply responding to her words was an act of cruelty. She told anyone who would listen that I had twisted things, that I was dividing the family. But from other mouths, the story sounded different. People who had been there at dinner told it quietly, but the truth has a way of slipping through cracks. They described her hissed remark, the way she said I was only tolerated, and how pale she went when I calmly answered back. Those details traveled, and once people heard them, the sympathy shifted. It wasn't humiliation they saw, it was exposure. The first real fallout came at church on Sunday. My husband and I walked in, and for the first time in years, people didn't just greet us politely. A woman from the choir leaned in and whispered, "Good for you." Another man clapped my husband on the shoulder and muttered, "About time someone stood up." It was subtle, but enough. I could feel the tide changing. Of course, she noticed it too. She stood near the back afterward, holding court with her usual circle. But instead of the nods and approving laughter she was used to, there were blank stares, hesitant smiles, people glancing my way. I saw her jaw tighten, her fingers grip her purse strap. She knew her version wasn't sticking the way she wanted. At home, the calls continued. Some of her relatives tried to guilt us back into the old pattern. "She's older, you should just let it go." She didn't mean it, don't make it bigger than it is. But I didn't bend. Each time, I calmly said the same thing. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking for respect. If that's too much, then maybe the problem isn't me. And then I let the silence sit until they didn't know what else to say. Meanwhile, my husband was different too. He started noticing all the little things he used to overlook. The way she dismissed me, the way she praised his sister while ignoring me, the subtle digs disguised as jokes. He admitted one night, "I used to think keeping quiet kept the peace, but it didn't. It just gave her more room to hurt you." That honesty meant more than I could explain. For once, I wasn't standing alone. The real shock came a few days later when my sister-in-law called me not to scold but to apologize. She sounded hesitant, almost embarrassed. "I didn't see it before," she admitted. "But at dinner, it was different. You were right to say something." I nearly dropped the phone. She had always been her mother's biggest defender, but now even she was starting to question. That was when I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. The cracks were spreading. Still, my mother-in-law didn't give up. She tried hosting another family dinner, sending out messages with flowery wording about healing and moving forward. But this time, people didn't rush to RSVP. Some made excuses, others just didn't respond. When the night finally came, the table was half empty. The empty chairs spoke louder than any argument. Her control was slipping, not because I screamed or stormed out, but because the truth had finally been heard. Walking away from that felt strange. Part of me wanted to celebrate, to feel vindicated, but another part felt the weight of it all. Families don't fracture neatly. There are always lingering stares, awkward run-ins, people who wish you'd just pretend it never happened. But I knew pretending was what had kept me trapped for so long. As I tucked my kids into bed that night, I thought about what kind of example I wanted to set. Did I want them to see a mom who swallowed disrespect for the sake of appearances, or one who stood tall, even when her voice shook? The answer was clear. By the end of that week, the fire had burned through more than just our dinner table. It had burned through the image she tried to maintain, the version of family where she pulled all the strings and everyone else played along. And standing in the ashes of it, I realized something powerful. She might keep trying, but the grip she had on us was gone. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot. She wasn't done fighting. But neither was I. And this time, I wasn't the only one ready to push back. Do you want me to carry part 6 into the closing? How the final confrontation unfolded and left everything hanging open for good? By the time the final confrontation came, weeks had passed, but the tension had only thickened. The half-empty dinner she hosted was a blow she hadn't expected, and instead of softening her, it hardened her resolve. I could feel it in the silence between us, in the clipped texts she sent to my husband, in the way mutual friends now carried little messages back and forth like they were shuttling between opposing camps. It all came to a head one Sunday afternoon. My husband and I had decided to take the kids to the park, just a simple outing. The air was brisk, the kind that makes your cheeks sting, and the kids' laughter echoed as they chased each other across the grass. For a moment, I let myself breathe easy, thinking maybe the storm had passed. But then I saw her. She was walking toward us, coat buttoned, gloves on, her steps firm like she had rehearsed this march. She didn't greet the kids, didn't smile. She went straight for us, her voice tight but clear. "We can't keep going like this," she said. It wasn't a plea, it was a declaration. I looked at her, steady, my husband standing close beside me. "You're right," I said softly. "We can't." The kids were still playing nearby, blissfully unaware, but the three of us stood in a small triangle of truth that couldn't be avoided. She pressed on. "I've given everything to this family. I've held it together, and now you're tearing it apart." Her words might have carried more weight once, but now they sounded hollow. I took a slow breath. "Number, what's tearing it apart isn't me speaking up. It's years of pretending. You built a family where control looked like love, where silence looked like respect. But that wasn't real, and you know it." For the first time, she didn't argue back right away. Her eyes flickered, her mouth opened, then closed again. My husband stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "Mom, you've always been the center of everything. But it came at a cost. We've all paid it. I've watched her pay it, and I let it happen. That stops now." There it was, the line she never wanted to hear. Not from me, but from him. That was the real shift. She could dismiss me, twist my words, but not his. His voice broke through where mine never could. Her eyes glistened, though whether from anger or hurt I couldn't tell. She looked smaller then, not the towering figure who had controlled rooms and conversations for years. Just a woman, clutching her coat tighter against the cold. "So this is it?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. The kids' laughter drifted back toward us, grounding me. Finally, I said, "This is a chance for things to be different, for respect to go both ways. But if you can't give that, then yes, this is it." The silence that followed was different from all the others. Not charged, not heavy with waiting, but final. A door quietly closing. She looked at both of us, her face unreadable, then turned and walked away across the park path, her figure shrinking against the winter trees. We didn't chase her. We didn't call out. We just stood there, letting the moment settle. My husband slipped his hand into mine, his grip steady. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were standing on solid ground together. That evening, as I tucked the kids into bed, I thought about the years behind me, the whispered insults, the backhanded comments, the way I had bent myself small to fit into her picture of what family should look like. I thought about the countless times I had stayed quiet to keep the peace, only to realize the peace was never mine to begin with. Now, though, something was different. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't even about changing her. It was about finally choosing not to live under the weight of her approval. It was about standing tall so my children would see what it looked like when someone refuses to be diminished. Later that night, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, I replayed it all in my mind. The dinner, the words, the fallout, the confrontation in the park. And I realized the circle had closed. She had hissed that I was only tolerated. But now, I saw the truth clearly. I didn't need to be tolerated. I deserve to be respected. I don't know if she'll ever change. Maybe she won't. Maybe she'll cling to her version of events forever. But I do know this things will never go back to how they were. That old script has been torn apart, and I'm no longer playing the role she wrote for me. As the house grew quiet around me, I whispered a small promise to myself. This story won't define me. It will remind me, and maybe, just maybe, it will be the beginning of a different kind of family, one built on honesty, not control. And that's where I leave it. A dinner that began with one cutting sentence ended with a truth that couldn't be silenced. I don't know if she realizes what she lost that night, but I know exactly what I gained. My voice, my strength, and the freedom to never be just tolerated again.